Welcome to TC Tiawi Talks. Tia Chucha Centro Cultural, located on Tataviam land in the northeast San Fernando Valley, is rooted in ancestral knowledge, culture, the arts, literacy, and social justice as a means to personal and communal transformation. It is a place where hearts and minds have united for change for over 19 years. Join us as we share the stories of personal transformation and our understanding of the world that unites us as a community. We must remember that another world has always been possible. Tiawi, a Nahuatl word for adelante, to move forward. Like a spiral, together we move towards a better future, cognizant of the resiliency we carry from our past.
Hi everyone and welcome. My name is Patricia. I'm an intern with the Teresas Trauma to Transformation Project, and I'll be your host for this episode of Tiawi Talks, where we'll be talking about arts, advocacy, and education for Filipinos here in the US and the Indigenous peoples in the Philippines. It's where I'm from. I'm a first-generation Filipino immigrant, and it's where our two guests are from. I'd like to introduce Hiyas Saturay. She was born and raised in the Philippines, where her family was forced to move to the Netherlands as refugees when the Philippine military targeted her family for organizing against a mining company trying to gain access to their island of Mindoro. Her connection to her roots in the Philippines motivated her to create Pangandoy, the Manobo fight for land, education, and their future, a film about indigenous schools in the Philippines. She was also arrested with her partner, Eric Dandok, while documenting a labor strike at the Nutriasia Condiments Factory in 2018 for the independent media outlet Alter Media. I also have the pleasure of introducing Theresa Jaranilla. Theresa earned a Master's of Arts in Asian American Studies from the University of California, Los Angeles, and a BA in English from the University of Florida. Theresa has more than 10 years of experience as an English teacher in LA, where she's worked with an instructional leadership team that supports teachers. She's also coordinated a program to support English language learners, students, and their families. Outside the classroom, Theresa gained experience volunteering with a local nonprofit by helping to coordinate a youth program that serves the needs of migrant families in the Long Beach and Carson area. In this episode, we'll be talking about their experiences in advocating for the rights of Lumad peoples through art and through culturally responsive education. For everyone listening, Lumad is the Cebuano term for indigenous or native tribes in the Philippines. And with that, I'd like to welcome Theresa and Hiyas.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming here today.
Thanks,
And
Patricia.
yeah,
Thanks.
so I just wanted to ask, I know there's a lot going on. How are both of you doing?
Let's go first. I'll just go.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I'm doing okay. I mean, yeah, it's hard to just balance like doing organizing work here in the US and keeping up with the news that's happening in the Philippines, and also acknowledging like the issues of our communities here. But yeah, it's really helpful to know like in the midst of all these crises to just like have an outlet and know that you can just like do something about it. I think that's what helps me, and just not be stuck at home and just yeah be filled with all this bad news all around you. So yeah, so I think that's just where I'm at. Yeah. How are you, Teresa?
I'm good. I think it's similar. Yeah, really, this can be a lot of information, updates of what's happening both here in the U.S. and the Philippines. But I think every time you feel you hear news that can be really discouraging or really sad, there's always a response, a way to bring people together in community, and through our organizing that brings you inspiration and hope even online, right? Like, it's amazing how resilient people in our community has been to continue with the organizing, and just adjusting in the conditions of the pandemic and to continue on. So that's always like a bright spot, that you don't feel alone in hearing the updates and wondering what to do. There's really always a way to take action.
Thank you. And you both bring up a good point. we're having to do all this work in the midst of pandemic, and especially for the advocacy work in the Philippines, it's that distance, that whole ocean between us. It's a big thing. Like even with social media, it makes it really hard to get the communication we need to bridge with those communities and to get the information we need. Do y'all mind going to a little bit more detail about the news that's affecting our community here and in the Philippines?
You go.
Okay. I mean, locally here, of course, there's so much. Our Filipino community is also very much impacted by the pandemic, especially, working class communities. Health workers have been impacted in a very huge way. We know that because nurses and other healthcare workers have been forced to migrate from the Philippines here to the US. They also have been very much on the front lines and have been affected by the pandemic, and their families as well. So the economic situation is definitely impacting working class communities, including our Filipino community. So that's a big issue here. But then, also connected to what's happening in the Philippines is also they're very much impacted as well with the worsening economic condition. And under the current Duterte administration, there really is intense suffering of the people without a response, an adequate response from the government, and continued repression of activists and other human rights workers who've done their best to provide for the community to continue on with their work, but have been faced with continued repression.
Yeah, and I think just to add on top of that, and it's something that's been happening even before COVID. We already know that, the current president, the Duterte regime, has really been, human rights violator, just carrying out this very rabid attack on the people, the poor, right, and his critics, like people who are trying to raise their voice against his human rights violations, or even like not just human rights violations, but even like the economic policies that really affect the people that he's carrying out, or even like the political issues in the Philippines, like just the corruption and everything that's just happening, like everything is going wrong under the Duterte regime. And so that's already been happening, right? And
Mhm.
then when COVID hit, it really heightened all these crisis that's happening, brought up the economic crisis, the job crisis, and yeah, like everything that people are going through just got a lot worse. So yeah.
What came up for me when you said that was, yes, like all these economic crises have been happening, these oppression has been happening, really we can say like since before the 80s, but much like the pandemic, Duterte really like brought it out, like really heightened it. um yeah. So Hiyas is getting her charger. While we're waiting, we touched a little bit about like the need for people to migrate out of the Philippines, out of necessity. So if you're comfortable, I wanted to ask you if you could share a little bit about yourself and your migration story.
Yeah, sure. Since Yes is getting something, I can start. I actually grew up here in the US. My parents actually met in Europe, so they migrated and met there. But I grew up here mainly in the United States on the East Coast, and then moved to the West Coast later on in life. But yeah, my parents, I guess my migration story is over a couple different continents until my family migrated here to the US.
Mine is very, very different from I think a lot of people, because both my parents have been activists in the Philippines for a long time. That's how they met, through doing political theater together, and they were we were living in Mindoro, an island called Mindoro, and they were fighting against like a mining company over there and organizing indigenous people struggles over there against the mining efforts. And then, when that was happening, that was under Gloria Arroyo several presidents ago, and she really unleashed attacks, like almost. I don't even know how to compare, but it was really bad, like kind of like what's happening right now too, just like killing indigenous people, killing activists who are at the forefront, or even just like everyday village people um, who are fighting against a mining company. And so it forced my parents to leave the island first and move to Manila. And then after that, like the political repression even spread all the way to Manila. Like they started killing people in many other places. And my dad was the first one to go outside of the country. He was like doing lectures in different universities about the mining situation, and one of his very close colleagues was killed, or two of them were killed at the same time when he was out of the country. And like it was kind of like a sign that it's really not safe to go back to the Philippines, and so he applied for political asylum in Europe. And then we followed like 3 years after. And so yeah, we were like young. I think I was like 14 then when we moved, and then I just ended up in the US because I went to school here, college. But yeah, that's kind of how we had to leave the country. Very different from, usually people leave for economic reasons, like for political reasons as well. Mhm.
14, that's not that long ago. So how old are you now, if I can ask?
I'm 29, so
Yeah, that's so recent. It really like puts
yeah,
into like a bigger picture, like these things are still happening.
yeah. Mhm.
Like, wow, I think everyone's migration story carries so much history, so much story. How are your parents now?
They're okay. They're also still continuing with the activism, and helping with like migrants organizing, just recognizing the links, right, of like being forced to migrate because of the economic crisis in the Philippines. Yeah, it's very connected to also the reasons that they were fighting against a foreign mining company that's taking out our resources, right?
Mhm.
Instead of like all those resources actually going to the country. And so yeah, they're okay.
That's good to hear. Yes, we love. Oh, I love it. I love that they're still continuing in the work that they do. We learn a lot from people who've been in it for a long time, and they contribute a lot to our growth as advocates. So, with that, I want to ask if you could both share a bit about your journey to being the advocates that you are now.
We're always gonna
Sounds a
have
little
we have to
cheesy. I'm
pause
sorry.
for each other.
Yeah.
I can go to follow up because it's coming from that family
Yeah.
history. So I guess there's more continuity. Um, yeah, like both my parents were always like bringing us around the protests and even like the indigenous communities, the Mangyan, they're called the Mangyan communities that they would go to. So we were pretty exposed at an early age, and we were participating, like singing songs, and they really explained to us what's going on. Like they explained to us what the mining company is going to do to the mountains that we really love playing around at. And so I felt like I give much respect to my parents for like really explaining and letting us understand even as children. But I think there was also a shift in my understanding when we went abroad, because it really made I was 14. I was like thinking more about my friends and barcadas that I had to leave in the Philippines. But it did make me question, like, why did we even have to leave? And we were surrounded by all these other migrants in the Netherlands who were talking about issues that are happening in their countries. And I felt like, oh man, like we have to tell them what's happening in the Philippines too. And so I think that's what made me like, like on my own also like study what's going on in the Philippines, the news, and even like study other countries as well. And understand even for myself, like the reason why we had to leave, and the political economic conditions that led to that. Yeah, so I think, it was a two-stage kind of growth. And then I think it was going to the US, like, brought it to a whole other level of, like, like in the Netherlands, Filipinos are kind of scattered, but here in California, it's very concentrated. And just like seeing the different ways that Filipino migrants struggle, and like the different ways the activism here are taking form, like different ways of organizing, like whether it's like protests at in front of the consulate, down to like just like door knocking to get people health insurance, or just like asking them how they're doing. Like, I think all those things just kind of like, all put together in my head, like the breadth of work that we need to do to kind of like organize the community, that will lead to like a bigger change. It's not like a one path kind of thing. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking off my head. Mhm.
Thank you. And Teresa, I also want to hear from you about that.
Yeah. Wow. So interesting to go back to back with Hiyas, because it's in some ways our paths converge, right? But before getting there, there really is a journey. I grew up in Florida, where there really weren't a lot of Filipinos in the community that we lived, and so there was really this hunger to know more about the Philippines. I really just was able to visit a few times when I was a child. And so that really kind of drove me and motivated me to really want to know more. And it's what led me to campus organizing when I was a college student around ethnic studies, the fight for Asian American studies. I think there were just many others in Florida and other parts of the country who just were hungry for that knowledge and wanting that connection, to understand like where they came from, what are we doing here? How did our families migrate, And so that experience with campus organizing led me eventually to come to California and to study Asian American studies, to really get to know more of my background, trying to understand the world, right? But it really wasn't until I went on an exposure, like an educational program in the Philippines with other students and young community members from different parts of the US, that I saw the Philippines in a completely different way. And it was a really incredible program that introduced us to different people's organizations, introduction to different issues, from women's issues to the plight of Indigenous people, to the kind of campus youth organizing that was happening, even to visit, farmers and communities where the urban poor were organizing. And that trip was very life-changing for me, because it wasn't like anything I'd ever read or tried to understand on my own, but to hear from the organizers themselves. And the people's organizations there really showed me how big the movement was. And we would always ask, well, what can we do? Because we're going to leave. We this program is only so short. And almost everyone said, well, when you go back to the US, what you can do is you can also help in organizing. You should join a people's organization and continue on. We have this connection across the ocean, and our fight is our fight together. So go home and join an organization, and tell people what you saw, what you learned, and continue on the other side of the ocean. So I think that's really what led me to the different organizations here in the Southern California area. And what has kept me going is remembering what all of those organizers and community members told us, that we do have a place to fight alongside with them.
Yeah, and I think that's so important, because like I didn't know about like those issues too until I was exposed to those organizations. So they're right. Yeah, there's a lot of work to be done here too. And I'm also curious, like how, because I know you guys are friends. How did you know each other? Like, how did you meet?
Where I first met you, it was my first time in California, it was actually the elections for Anakbayan, Los Angeles's EC. And I think Teresa was being elected for AD officer. And I was like, I think people are like whispering to me, like, oh yeah, she's a teacher, so she's really good at education. And so, like, I mean, that's the first time we met. And then just, I feel like a lot of my memories with Teresa is working on like EDs or like educational discussions. Because yeah, I also have like yeah, I'm very interested in just teaching and education, and like Teresa is like obviously a teacher, and so we worked a lot on like high school youth education workshops and even just like community discussion, and so yeah, that's kind of fun stuff.
Yeah, it's always, those are always, that's true. It's been many years, but my memories of Hiyas are really trying out,
Yeah.
developing workshops, different curriculum, and it's always been, I think, the most fun with the high school youth. Lots of different youth from the area, especially with Filipino migrant youth. Yeah, it's been a fun time developing those things.
Yeah, and I think, just pointing out that I think that's what I really also, I mean, there's of course the conviction that you have to always have in organizing, but an added bonus, and I think it's just like great to get to meet different people and then get to work with a lot, like many different people in the movement. But also, I think the thing I appreciate the most is just getting to try out and figure things out. And like a lot of problem solving, trying out new things that you've never tried before, and you'll never know if it's gonna work until you like really try it. And then like looking back at it, it's like, okay, what worked, what didn't, and kind of just moving on from that. It's a very interesting process that I think is very integral in movement building, because I don't know, I've been reflecting a lot about it, and it's hard because you're trying to create something new, of course, like the end goal of this, the long-term goal is like a completely new society, and no one's created that before, and we're all just like trying out in our own little ways in different parts. So it's fun, and it's challenging, but it's fun.
Yes, that's so important because, like you said it, you need conviction, but without the community, without the people you meet, and of course, like you need fun in there too. Like that's how you keep going, right? I'm curious about the educational discussions that you guys like work together on. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Oh my gosh, which one? Oh man,
With the youth.
with the youth, you want to share about it, Teresa? I think you
Yeah,
have.
sure. I think for well, every summer we've both volunteered and helped with this Filipino youth program that really tried to incorporate arts and culture, but also to develop the leadership skills of Filipino youth and their understanding of the world around them. So just as our discussion started with what is your migration story, we would start with that with them as well, right? So seeing, understanding yourself, your history, but also placing yourself in the context of what is happening and what has happened in our people's history. So also, raising their consciousness to be able to analyze the world around them, but then to also take the fun aspects of dance or music or poetry, and to use those forms to express themselves, but then also for them to be able to show to the community the issues that matter to them, their own stories, which they would always kind of present back at the end of the summer to show what they've learned, but also like what Hiyas is saying earlier, we envision a different society, and young people have that enthusiasm, that creativity to bring forth those ideas, and to show to everyone, young and old, what is the kind of community and society that they long to live in and work towards. And so that's kind of been a joy every summer to see that unfold and to see them, grow up and continue on in the organizing.
Yeah, it's super fun. I miss it in person. Like, I don't know how to do it virtually. But just to add, like, I think the education aspect, like, that the movement has really taught me is um, that it's, well, it's also, you can read it in many books too, but it's not like, you're a teacher and you have all this knowledge and then you just like plug it into like someone else's brain, right? Like, I think the most fulfilling and enjoyable educational discussions is really when it's like a discussion that goes like in many ways, not just like even two ways. Like, you really learn from each other. Like all these high school youth, they have like experiences at home, for example, like with their families, trying to even get permission from their parents to go out or do other stuff. Like, that's like a daily struggle for them, or like getting their parents to understand what they're going through, just like communication issues, and for them to be in like, for us, we're just facilitating this conversation that they're having with their peers who are also experiencing a lot of similar stuff, and they have a lot of advice to say to each other, and then also just seeing that process of them realizing that, oh, it's not just like me, or it's not just like my parents sole issue, like, and then like what, as facilitators, teachers, educators in the community, helping bring in this more systematic analysis of like what are the cultural roots of these you know issues that you're having at home. Like, why are Filipino parents so strict? um where is that generational gap coming from? Like, and a lot of it is coming from like, the culture in the Philippines too, where families are very hierarchical, and like as children you're supposed to just follow. But we can imagine different families too in the future, right? And like maybe how to have conversations with your parents too. And so just like I think that's an example of how different it is as well from just mainstream ways we view education. So yeah, I feel like those are things that we would nerd out to. If we can.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, I wish there was
Yeah.
a program like this when I was growing up. Like, it sounds so important. I think asking youth those questions, like asking them to imagine a society how they want it. It's like we need more of that, and using arts as a way to do it and to reconnect with culture. I think is so important. So thank you for facilitating those. I'm still, and let me process that because it's so cool.
Do it too. I mean, I feel like there's enough materials out there that we can always share.
Do you still hold these discussion groups like virtually?
Not recently. I don't know for
I
y'all.
think there was an attempt in the summertime, but it's much more challenging virtually.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll continue to find ways to engage young people. I think it's of course still needed, but it's definitely a challenge to have the kinds of programming that we had in the past and education online.
Definitely. And I think one more point that resonated with me with what you said is how this is different from mainstream education. And yesterday I was talking to CSUN's Pathways program and how they view mentorship, and really how how you can measure like success in that relationship is if the teacher, the mentor, is learning from the students, which is so different from how we're as a society like measuring it. We have like tests, like did the kids learn this, but like what did the teacher learn from the students, and more importantly, like was community formed between the peers, which is, yeah. So I guess I also want to ask, because I know both of you have done work with Lumad groups in the Philippines. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, for me it was do I start? Because my interest in it also started in just like, as children when my parents would take us to indigenous communities, and then like, yeah, just remembering those memories of going to their communities, sleeping in their bahay kubos and playing in the river with their kids. And just, I think as I got older, I wanted to just understand that more, um, and just understand their struggle more. And then I started, when I was here organizing in California, I started hearing about indigenous schools in Mindanao, that the indigenous people themselves are building. And so I was like, like doing all these education stuff already, and then like connecting it to the indigenous people struggles in the Philippines. I was like, oh man, this is like, I really want to see it. And I think Teresa was part of that batch who was before me, and like when I first heard about it, that really made me wanna go there. Um, and just like understand how are they able to build their schools, right? And so yeah, I used it for my, not used it, but basically like in my college we're supposed to have like senior projects, and so that was just like what I ended up doing is going there, spending like I think almost 2 months in the community, and then like my end product was creating a documentary about the schools. So it was, yeah, a very fruitful journey, and I appreciated because how we planned it, even in conjunction with my professors, is to really like first integrate with the communities, like not take out the cameras yet. And so that was actually the longer period. And then after like understanding what they're going through and building trust with them, like also asking them like, what are the stories you would want to tell? What are the stories you would want to put out there? And really working with the community on building that documentary. So I ended up making Pangandoy, which means like aspirations or dreams, which is all about the schools, the indigenous schools in the Philippines. So yeah, but yeah, I just realized that now that I think some of the first stories were from Teresa's batch that I heard. So maybe you can share how it was like for you too.
Yeah, sure. I was able to spend a summer. I joined this international solidarity mission, and that was the first time that I was able to see the schools in Mindanao. It was a incredible kind of batch of people to go with, because Filipino and non-Filipino people of different backgrounds, faith leaders, educators, artists, photographers, people who really just heard about the schools like I did, and the campaign work that was happening even before I was able to visit, by other organizations and individuals who had gone to the schools and have saw, what an alternative school could look like in areas where families and children have not had access to schools or basic necessities like healthcare. And so my visit there was really an incredible experience to hear from the community members and the students themselves, how the school was built, and how it continues to really be a big part of their lives. To witness also how they design, curriculum in such a different way. The idea like that the classroom is actually your entire community. It's the world around you. And it's not just what you write on a blackboard in these four walls, but seeing how it really was designed to uplift the culture of the indigenous communities, to learn about, the plants and the land, and even the music and the dance that the children shared to us as visitors at the time, told the story of their history, but also the history of the history and the current resistance that the communities continued on against, mining, the kind of illegal logging, and the building of dams in some areas that really threatened their livelihood. And so you could also see how culture and the use of art was also a big part of their lives, and impactful for us to hear their stories in that way too. So yeah, that was years ago, but I think batches after continued to visit and to see, and people even wanting to return to see the schools and how they've developed over the years, because it really is an inspiration to all of us. But I think as an educator, it was so fascinating to see a completely different model of school as we imagine. Really being integrated into the community and really built for the needs of the community.
Yeah, I saw a little glimpse of that in Hiyas's documentary, and one of the residents said that this school kind of helped tighten the glue in their community. Now that this thing that's here, then yeah, I think their bonds are in that area too just got stronger. I also am curious if you could share a little bit of background of um, why this alternative model needed to happen. We also mentioned a little bit about the mining operations that's been happening there. How has that affected the educational access in the area?
Yeah.
I mean,
Oh, you can go ahead.
I could just start off and then you can add the school, the area where the schools were really built, there were no schools there. It really was a need that was identified in the community, that young people, the community as a whole really needed schools, and to be able to access education in these kind of far-flung areas. And so the schools were designed with the community in mind, and built with the community to support them, empowering them to fulfill that need. But of course, very much the areas where the schools are built and where these communities are on top of very rich land, their ancestral land that is attractive to foreign mining corporations and other projects that would really that threatened the land that they're on. So it has over the years, they're really fought to keep the schools open, but they've been heavily militarized and shut down because of these fights against the big corporations coming in to mine.
I think in addition to that context of how it even came about, in its history, the indigenous communities there, they were telling me that they've been tricked into signing off some parts of their land, because I mean, under Philippines law, there's like ancestral domain that's supposedly for them, right? Like for their tribes, for their yeah, for their communities. But then when there's like mining interests coming in, or like logging, like in the communities where I was in, it was logging in their history. Um, yeah, like people go there with like a blank piece of paper and just get people to like put in their thumbprints, which is a sign that they signed it and they consented to like allowing these corporations to like take out the trees from their land, and they don't know anything. And um, people who are the companies who are coming in are just saying like, oh yeah, this is good for you because you can get jobs and you'll get wages and you'll be able to buy like cans of sardines from the city and just like have this lifestyle that like they're not living in a bubble. They know how the towns look like, and that's projected as like the good life. And so yeah, they end up like giving away parts of their land, and then eventually seeing the harm that the logging does, and even like the cultural effects of it, the culture that they lose when that happens. And when all the wood is done, like and the company leaves, there's nothing. And so I think the community itself realized that they wanted their children to learn how to read and write and understand all these things that are being brought to them. And so they're the ones who also initiated and asked for like the organizations in the city to help them build schools. And so yeah, they actually it was very much in conjunction with the community leaders there. um, yeah, so
Yeah, I think that does relate to like these schools and how it's responsive to their needs and culture. It's a form of resistance to the things that's been happening to their environment and their way of life. I'm I'm curious how the school that you both have worked with is doing. Like, how are they now?
Oh man. I mean, it's sad because I think the one, I mean, I went to multiple ones, but I think the one that was featured in the film had to close down. And pretty much, you know, a big part of the community had to evacuate and go to the city to kind of like put out the call that, hey, you know, our community is getting militarized and no one is hearing us from up there, and so they had to go to the city. But there in the city, they continued having those schools. They call them the Bakwit schools. It's called Bakwit because it came from evacuations and Bakwit. Um, and so it's kind of like the short term for it. And so yeah, there's still like volunteer teachers continuing that. But I don't know if people have heard recently the news that some of the Bakwit schools have even been attacked. So there was one in Cebu that was recently raided. And actually, one of the interviewees, the Datu there that you were talking about, who's talking about their education, is one of those who got arrested. So Datu Benito. And so, yeah, like I've been seeing him just in the city trying to advocate for the schools, but yeah, they're just met with constant attacks, being accused that these schools are indoctrinating them. But you know, it's really the communities who wanted these schools to happen. And if you talk to these children, um, they know what they're learning. Like they're super sharp, um, and they're down for it. You know, it's not like they're just reciting things from history books or you know whatever that I've seen in other places, but they really know if you can keep them asking questions and they can engage in a debate, you know, if you ask them to. So um, yeah, so that's the update, unfortunately. But you know, like they're still fighting. um, they're very yeah, they continue with the resistance, protect their culture, their land, their schools, their community.
Thank you for that update. And I'm so sorry to hear about what happened to that school and their leader, the Datu. I think I'll link resources to news about that in the YouTube page. But yeah, I heard about what had happened and how it's being framed as a rescue as opposed to a raid, where it makes no sense to me because in the videos you see the children being handcuffed. I think that tells you like so much of what you need to know in that act and how terrified the children were. It's so sad. Um, yeah, I guess I want to ask if you guys can share um, a favorite moment you had when you were living and integrating with this community. Just to kind of like, I guess, introduce a little positivity in that situation.
I think one of the highlights for me, I mean, there was a lot of, there were a lot of people who came also from the city and were providing different psychosocial services for the children because they were very much affected by a big typhoon in that area. So there was like a lot of structured programming that was happening while we were there. But I think one of the highlights for me was an unstructured just kind of discussion with the children, just a little bit of downtime, and we were able to ask them, you know, what they thought about the schools, what were some of their dreams, you know, for their community and for themselves. And I was very surprised because here in the U.S., when you ask children what are your dreams, like what do you want to become, their answers are like, I want to be a basketball player or a doctor, or I want to be a millionaire. But many of the children said that their dream was really to be teachers in their schools, to be able to continue on like their um, the fight that their community had. And their biggest dream was to continue on with their schools because it was such a big part of their community, and they really respected, all the changes that happened because they were able to create such a beautiful, school for themselves that wasn't just like a building where you learn math, but it was a place where they saw the community come together to be able to receive and provide resources to the community, but also where they felt empowered. And so it was very, heartwarming for me to hear the students say that they want to stay in their communities. They want to grow, the nursery that they started. They want to see it flourish as like their farms with their native plants. They want to be able to teach as teachers to their younger, siblings and other community members. That's their dream, and it's a big dream because it's creating, a society and a community where they feel secure and they feel empowered to make the changes that are needed. But then, to think about that now is hard because they don't have that. They've had to, as a form of resistance, leave their communities to share what is happening. But I think for me, it always stayed with me because so many of my students before never would say that they would ever want to be teachers or, to stay in their communities and to learn kind of the ways of how to farm and how to really build up the neighborhood, the community that they're in. But it really showed the impact of the school, and not just the school, but what was happening in that community on the children, that they really felt this desire to stay and to continue on with its transformation. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I just want to say that for better or for worse, I know you helped them to get a little bit closer to that.
Yeah. I'm like trying to pick one because when you go there, you really learn a lot and you really experience a lot. Like I feel like even from like the trip going up there, it's it's not like you just get in a car and then like you're there at the school, like like you have to hike, and it's not like the normal hike too. And then like people help you, so like just like even the whole community effort and just like helping visitors go up there and how they welcome you. Yeah, just like trying to get to know you. Some people are shy and all these things. I'm like trying to choose which memory was like my favorite. But I think one experience that I just like, it's just very simple. But I think it was like kind of downtime. It was weekend, but there were two girls who were staying in the school because they live in like a community that's like 9 hours away from the school. And so, they just decide to stay there most of the time and then go home every now and then. But yeah, it was downtime. The mother who was also interviewed in the film gave us like this just like whole basket of cassava. And so we're like, oh, let's make cassava suman, like, this steamed cassava cake, I guess, that's wrapped in banana leaves. And yeah, it was just like a nice afternoon where it's those two girls who really took lead and just like teaching us how to do it. And we like everything was from scratch. We took this like the can from sardines and like used a nail to poke holes through it, so it has these jagged edges. So we use that as a grater, and then we just like had to work a lot to just grate all that cassava and then like mix it with sugar. And then they were just like telling us all these stories like throughout the process. I think it's when those teachers were also there, also learning from the students and telling us like, yeah, we had to like also learn their language. We don't just like, we're not the ones who are like teaching the language to them, like bringing English or whatever. And to just like see the dynamics also of the relationship between the teachers and the students, really like, yeah, they're just like friends. And it kind of like brought me back to just this thing we were just talking about families, right? There's always this hierarchy of like the parent is always right, but like over there they were really like learning from each other, and you know, in this very everyday context of like creating food, that was just there from their backyard. It was from cassava that they planted like a year ago, so they even like told us about the system they had of like planting every certain period so that they always have something every month. And yeah, I just like, I feel like I learned a lot from just that one afternoon of making cassava suman, and it was super good too. So yeah, I think that's one of the moments there.
That sounds so warm, and wow, I hope, well, did you take home a cassava suman recipe?
I think I did. Oh, the recipe, it's, you know, I didn't write anything down. You just have to keep tasting it and
Uh-huh.
hope that it turns out good. But yeah. I learned how to make it from practice, I
That's
guess.
awesome. And I love the DIY grater.
Yeah.
Um, well, it looks like our time is almost up, but I have one more question for both of you. In the Pangandoy documentary, there was a teacher who shared her um, I guess, views of what the community could look like 10 years from now. And she said the community and their environment, they would have a lot of trees and that their culture is thriving, that the people are no longer going hungry and it's healthy and peaceful. What they plant is theirs. She mentions that. So I want to ask what has to happen for the community to get there or what is already happening.
Yeah. Want to take a stab at it, Teresa?
What needs to happen? I mean, I think it's a long road, but I think what the communities are doing and continuing to speak out, and continuing their resistance and defending their land, and our our role in that as well as people overseas who are far away from the Philippines, but still really have that deep connection to it, is part of it, right? Our continued work to ensure that they have the right to self-determination, that they have the right to live on their land, is part of it as well, right? And to ensure that they're they they are protected, right? That their basic rights are not being violated. Human rights of all in the Philippines, but in particular, if we look at the struggle of the Lumad, the rights of Indigenous peoples to live and to thrive on their land is one that is not just their fight, but for those in the city, for those in other countries who see the importance of solidarity, which we saw expressed, you know, in that in a recent action, online action calling for the freeing of the Lumad 26 young people from all over the U.S., other groups, people of faith, educators, different walks of life, seeing the importance of the struggle of the Lumad, and our role in also speaking up to ensure that they can continue to live and not just live but build, you know, this society that they see for themselves.
Yeah. Um, it is a long road ahead. Um, it also makes me think about, you know, like if I just think about the community and what that teacher said of, yeah, having like, you know, their mountains full of trees again and their schools, like as a community they can totally do that. Like they're already doing it, you know. Um they're keeping they're trying to protect their forests, they plant trees, they have their schools. A lot of the teachers are actually, I think, you know, there's like generations of people going to the schools already, so they can teach each other at that, like at this point. So it's super possible. But what's really preventing that is, the bigger social context um, they're in, where these efforts to really build that community is under attack, right? Why is building a community-based school, um, you know, tagged as terrorism in the Philippines, right? So there's that big social context that, if we could change that, um, yeah, like the communities can really, yeah, find self-determination and determine, that's what self-determination means, like where they want to bring their community to. And so I think that's where, what Teresa's talking about, the connection of our role, is seeing that bigger picture, that we really need to remove or like change this bigger thing that's blocking um, the growth and development of our communities, the progress of our communities, right? Which is the systemic oppression, the economic crisis, that is embedded in this system in the Philippines and even across the world right now. And so I think for me that helps make that connection on, like, okay, why do I need to go door knocking and do the survey tomorrow and understand, the needs of the migrants? How is that connected to this 26 Lumad children and teachers who are arrested? It's all part of the big fight. And I think overseas, it takes some time to like see that, but it's there. The connections are there, for us to make, and yeah, for us to really see that we're all fighting for this better future. I guess it sounds super nice, and it's not an easy path, and there's a lot of problems on the way, a lot of struggles, but yeah, we'll get there. That's what needs to happen. We just need to make it happen.
Yeah, and I think it is a long way, but reflecting back, I think we've also gone a long way if we're talking about education. I think we are starting to see from their earlier efforts to start their own schools, and teach self-determination in those schools. We're seeing now like strong leaders from that community who have probably benefited from those education, rise up and help their community, and it's awesome. And you touched a little bit too about the diaspora, like knocking on doors to support migrant rights, how that's connected to fighting for Lumad rights. I think definitely, we've been spread out, but we're also connected to that bigger picture. Yeah, but thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking to the both of you.
It's fun being in an interview with Teresa. I don't think we've been in this context before.
Yeah, thanks for inviting us, bringing us together. It's always fun.
I hope you learned something new from this too, if you did, like from each other.
Yeah. Of course. I always learn something new every time in the storytelling, because there's so much. I mean, in our own experiences, there's always new things to learn. And from you too, Patricia. So thanks for having us and for sharing too, as we get to know each other.
Yeah.
I'll interview you next time.
Oh wow. Thank you. And yeah, if you guys have any resources that you want me to share with our agency or with anyone listening to this podcast, like send me a link and I'll put it to.
Can I add real quick?
Yes.
I mean, I think all of us. I mean, we're part of Malaya movement, right? To just like put it out there that it's one just very tangible way of just taking that first step of like learning more about what's going on in the Philippines and kind of addressing the issues that's going on there. So yeah, join Malaya.
Yeah.
If you're interested.
I'll link the card.
That's it.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you again for joining us. Please remember to subscribe to our podcast and follow Tia Chuchas on social media. Please support our online bookstore. You can find the links in our podcast bio. Stay safe, stay creative. Tiawi.